Hi, I'm Jonathan Moreno. I'm professor of medical ethics and health policy at the University of Pennsylvania. In April 2016, our department decided to hold the first annual Bioethics Film Festival, a celebration of the way that ethical issues are raised in the movies. One of the films that we showed is called Transformation. It's a documentary about the life and work of EST founder Werner Erhard. After the film, I sat with Mr. Erhard and we talked for about an hour about his ideas, about his career, about his work, the way that the controversies about EST and the accomplishments of EST affected the society, and what he's been doing since the early days of EST. We think that this discussion really illustrates the way that it's possible to look back at major social change, a big event in the history of our society, a fascinating attempt to understand what is the self and ethical issues that are raised when we try to understand who we are, and also the issues that are raised when there are these efforts, in this case, a big effort to understand how other people affect us and how we can change ourselves, how we can undergo a transformation. In this case, one modeled by a particular well-known and controversial individual, Mr. Erhard himself. So we hope you enjoy the discussion, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Bioethics Film Festival in 2017 at Penn. Ladies and gentlemen, the kid from Norristown who made good, Werner Erhard.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. You're very kind.
I have a feeling some people know about you. So I want to not forget to do a couple of things. Please
Great.
Remind me. First, let's talk about how you feel about the film 10 years later.
Yeah.
I want to talk about what you've been doing in the last 10 years, bring it up to date. I want to also tell everybody here that Werner and I will be having a conversation. If you would like to ask Werner a question, raise your hand, get the attention of one of my colleagues, and you will be given a piece of paper and a pen, a souvenir pen from Bioethics, a pen, Bioethics pen, and I will then read as many of them as I can, make it as efficient as we can. I want to explain to my colleagues who are here from my department, it's a confession. The reason I wanted to have a Bioethics Film Festival was to get a little time to hang out with Werner. My wife will tell you that is actually true. Now, but we have had many conversations. Probably nothing I will ask you is something we haven't talked about. But I do want to share with the group how you and I got connected. I'm professor of bioethics and Werner Erhard.
Yeah.
So I grew up as the son of another controversial person who is a psychiatrist who founded the field of psychodrama, was the first person to use the term group therapy. Many of his ideas were taken by the human potential movement, among the disciplines that Werner was interested in the 60s. And he died in 1974 at the age of 85. And he was a controversial person. A lot of stuff got thrown his way, and I, as a son, observed it. And then in the 70s, I started reading about Werner. Now, I've never done the training, but I was doing group therapy training at that time. And I think, maybe I'm wrong, that I kind of got EST, reading about it. I know it's not the same as doing it. I know. We're doing it now. I hope I know my asshole from a hole in the ground, by the way. We'll find out. But having observed my dad, getting a lot of criticism, having his ideas cannibalized by the culture, then you came along. And what interested me, even when I read about, I think it was the New York Times Magazine story, which I think it was in the Times Magazine. And I said, I don't know what's going on with this guy, or what he's doing, but he is the target of so much invective. It seems so over the top. And so a lot of the film is about this. Like I made a stupid joke last night about locking people in a room and having no bathroom breaks, and of course then there's the brainwashing and so forth. A lot of it has been said. I want to get, how does it feel to you now? It's what, 43 years? How does it feel to you now? Is there anything new to add to this, or is it just all the bullshit?
Jonathan, for me, you know, I really hate saying nice things because it's too easy.
Yeah.
But I just have to tell you that what it's about for me is what happened in the lives of the people who participated in the programs. And what it's about even today is what happens in the lives of people who participate not in EST anymore, because that's part of the past, and not even in Landmark's program, although I have a little bit of consulting to do with that. But now when I deliver a lecture in a university at a business school about the difference that real integrity actually makes, and I'll get a letter back from a guy, a businessman, who didn't start out using integrity in his business, but got there through an interaction, a matter of integrity with his son. And, you know, that's where that all lies for me. And I think a lot of what was in the media was misrepresentation. But, you know, so what? You don't like the heat, don't go in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So I didn't want what I did to be an extension of what was already there, to make it better, to make it easier, to make it anything as an extension of what was already there. And if you are going to step outside the 9 dots, as they call it, you know, you're going to have controversy, and too bad.
Part of the ball game.
Yes, exactly.
So a few years ago, when I was about to write this book about my dad, I had breakfast in Philly with a mutual friend named Paul Zak, who was an economist at the Claremont Graduate School. And he knew some about my dad's stuff, and I said, I'm going to write this book. And he said, well, that's great. Why don't you talk to Werner? And I knew he was talking about. I said, well, I don't really talk to him. He said, I can get you to Werner. 3 days later, we are having this email, and it really struck me that you were so open, because I had seen what had happened. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. And then we had a fantastic first meeting in New York a few years ago.
Yep.
Then there was, a few months ago, the New York Times piece, which was terrific, and I thought got it right.
Yeah.
And now, as many of you know, there is a series called The Americans. Anybody watching The Americans? About an embedded KGB couple in the 1980s in Northern Virginia, and they go to an EST. One of them goes to an EST meeting, 3rd or 4th season, and I'm watching. I'm thinking, oh shit, you know, this is bad, you know. And the truth is, now, what is the 5th season? Help me out. It's the beginning of the 5th season, 4th. And the truth is, so far, they're quite respectful, right? And I find that very interesting, because it seems to me, I'm interested in history of science like you. Every generation reinterprets what happened. And I think as the confusion between the target, Werner Erhard, and the work begins to clarify, it's easier for people to see what's going on.
Yeah.
You think that's right? I mean,
Yes,
that's
I
sort
do.
of what's been said in the film.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, you know, it was the transition, for example, from EST to the Forum was a transition in the culture, as far as I could tell, that the kind of the kind of force required to get past where people were at in the 70s was simply not there anymore.
Yeah.
People were actually had their feet on the ground a great deal more and were thoughtful in terms of what, instead of some kind of magic, what was available with what was available grounded in what I could see for myself, rather than what I couldn't see but I could believe in. So that made the transition to the forum make sense.
So, as you look at the film now, and you said, you just told me to walk out, you hadn't seen the whole film at once?
No, I had.
You know, what's your gut reaction?
You know, I don't know. It's like, I can remember interacting with the people I saw me interacting with. I can remember those people. And I have to tell you, that's a very moving experience for me.
Yeah.
To see the courage, wow, that of people willing to be straight about what they've been crooked about in the past, even though most people wouldn't characterize it as being crooked. But, you know, again, to be Werner Erhard-ish about it.
To come to grips.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't do the Werner Erhard, but I can, yeah.
Yeah, so I was moved by that. I thought that the people who were critical were good at doing what they did. They made the right kind of questions. I think that they posed them as answers, unfortunately, but it was certainly, you know, was this a cult? Now, you know, I'm not going to give all the defenses about that because I think it's irrelevant, but it was important, for me at least, to keep up in front of me is what I'm doing somehow leading to some sort of a cult. And I have to tell you that the answer for me is no, looking at it as hard as I know how to look at it. Yeah, I think people, you have a transformational experience, and it's very difficult to keep it to yourself. Yeah. And it's kind of like the time I got an opportunity to work with what we called at the time Youth at Risk, which program continues to today, to see what happened with young gang kids, I mean literal gang kids, when the possibility of making a difference in other people's lives, what that did with them and how committed they became to that possibility. So, yeah, so what am I saying? I'm saying that I think a transformational experience to go through a moment after which you are left free to be and free to act, to be able to, so I'm going to say it as straight as I can say it. When you can leave behind the way you wound up being, when you're free to choose beyond the way you wound up being, that is so powerful an experience that you're likely to become over-enthusiastic about it.
So, when I was, I think I got that. So, I was thinking while I was watching the movie about something we talked about the first time we met. We were talking about the various human potential experiences of the 60s, and I asked you what you'd done and what you'd seen and so forth. And in particular, I mentioned Primal Scream. And I had witnessed, I think I told you this, 1973, a group Primal in Zurich, at the University of Zurich during a group psychotherapy conference. And essentially, it was 24 people in a room of about 50 or 60 people sitting around in a circle, screaming. And the phrase that the leader is a Dr. Casriel, a famous psychiatrist who was doing this demonstration, told them to repeat again and again in the circle was, "I hurt too. I hurt too. I hurt too. I hurt too." And the results were incredible, right? Hysteria. After the event, I went out with the college friend that I was there at the conference with, and we ran into 3 youngish people from Germany. And the girl, who was a graduate student, all of them were, 2 guys and a girl, was very upset. She had not been in the inner circle. She was just in, and they were trying to comfort her. And it really made a big impression on me in terms of the power of the experience. Right? However, you said to me, which I thought was very good, I never wanted to leave anybody raw. It was the lack of completeness that was the problem, in my view.
Yeah, yeah, and that's right. You know, just watching with the young woman who,
The orphan.
Yeah,
The ex-orphan.
yeah, that's right, the ex-orphan, to have, you know, I don't know what it takes to step into the danger there, but whatever it took, I was drawn to step into the
That's
danger
very interesting, right? There was something about the two of you.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because she was obviously really fragile.
And really in pain. I
Yeah,
mean, you
and
could
deep pain, yeah.
The posture.
Yeah, and it was interesting to watch the posture change.
Yes.
Until she walked up onto the platform at the end.
Which people are now being taught to do, particularly women, as you know, in business schools, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Change the posture.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. Let's see. No,
Sorry.
I shouldn't discuss fake it till you make it.
No, well,
Okay.
whatever. If you want to go there, it's okay.
But at any rate, there are certain things that I think you have to be willing to be responsible for when you step into people's lives. And for sure, one of the things you need to be responsible for is to not let people, don't step out and leave them in a raw place. Now, with my colleagues, when we do this leadership course, I talk to them about, look, you can step away from a person when you have what I call the hook set. And what do I mean by that? You know, that's tough language, but what I mean by it is when a person has started to deal for themselves with the conflicting views, i.e. the one they walked in with and the one being presented to them, when they're starting to take a look at, they're oftentimes better off on their own. But you damn well better not forget who they were, so that you're watching to see that they are moving along with whatever it is that they got left with.
So that actually brings me to a conversation I was having with a friend who had the training 10, 15 years ago, when she was at a very bad time in her life. Serious illness, little kids, marriage failing. And she went to the training, and I said, so what'd you come out with? And now, you know, it's really an impolite question, right? Because who cares, right? I know Werner Erhard would say, that's not a good question. But nonetheless, I asked. And she said, it was fear. It was just fear. You know, that's what it helped me deal with, was fear.
Yeah.
And that is so primal, right? It's more primal than anxiety, which to me is somewhat more intellectual.
Yeah.
Fear, I mean, fear is just, you know, it's right here.
Yeah.
So talk about fear. Talk about how you dealt with fear. Because a lot of what the people you were working with were dealing with was fear, ultimately, of giving up the story.
Yeah. And Jonathan, for me, I think that fear is pretty close to universal. I mean, you can't get more basic when you're talking about survival than fear. I mean, it is what is required in a tooth and claw environment to be able to function. So I think that, you know, walk down the street in the wrong neighborhood and you might feel some fear. Walk down the street in certain parts of Northern Ireland, and you're likely to feel some fear. The question is, I'm not going to get rid of fear because it's a part of my nervous system.
It's biological.
Yes, exactly. Biological, better way to say it. And but how am I going to be in the face of fear? Now, most people are never going to ask that question because most people are not going to get in touch with what they fear. Yeah. Because to get in touch with what one fears is frightening.
Yeah. Yeah. We do have something to fear other than fear itself.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah. But also, so what am I saying? That I think it's important to look at the possibility of equipping myself to be able to function effectively and to be able to be useful even when I'm frightened. Yeah. And moreover, I think it's really useful to start to locate what is it that this which is frightening for me reminds me of, and can I complete that? And a lot of what happened in and still happens to a degree in programs that I participate in is to let people get in touch with how useful this being frightened was when I was a child. You know, can I understand a 7-year-old, a 3-year-old having that kind of response? And can I have the compassion to see how legitimate it was, but do I need to have that response to a like situation now that I'm whatever age I am? And while, you know, it might trigger something for me, I don't know that I need to respond in the way in which I responded then.
A more novel and adequate response to an old situation.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And ultimately, I really think it's possible to get to the place where you're so related to what's out, sorry, I'm going to use jargon. You're so related to what's out here that what's going on in the aspects of myself that I don't have any choice about reduces the impact of what's going on in those aspects of myself that I don't have anything to do with.
Yeah. So I want to make sure that we bring some of the questions down.
Great.
While we're still yakking. Anybody have some for me? Great, thank you. So before we get to some of the, wow. All right, we're going to be here for a while. Obviously, I apologize in advance. Can't do all of them, but we'll do a lot. One other thing that occurred to me when I was thinking about this afternoon, because I don't want to talk about EST, and I know you don't even want to talk about EST, is one of the other projects, the Hunger Project. Mm. And it seems to me you got a lot of, yeah. You got a lot of, I don't know, people made fun of the Hunger Project, the scale of it. And yet it strikes me, in the 21st century, we have entrepreneurs who are doing very expansive projects. It's more fashionable now, or more. So we don't laugh when Bill Gates says he wants to eliminate parasitic diseases. We don't laugh when Elon Musk says he wants to go to the Mars before anybody else. But I think 40 years ago, 30 years ago, people that weren't thinking in those kind of scale so often. You did. You talk a little about the Hunger Project, and I never talked to you, I think, about John Denver.
Mm-hmm.
What did losing, this is a two-part question, the Hunger Project, and what did losing John Denver mean to you?
You know, John was a truly decent human being. I mean, down to his toes. Like all of us, I'm sure he had failings, but I just never, ever, and I spent time with John, never saw him act in any way other than as a decent human being. He was obviously a great musician. I mean, that doesn't need me to say anything about that part. And John really did, not in terms of what it would look like, but in terms of what it would mean to him, want to make a difference in addition to his musical talent and his career. And Jerry Weintraub, who was John's manager for a long time, and also a decent human being, but a totally different character than John. Jerry actually always understood that that was important to John, and Jerry was always supportive of John, and that wasn't there was no value in it for Jerry, that part of John's life. So at any rate, as you can tell, I have an enormous regard, respect for John. And
losing him for you?
Excuse me?
Losing him?
No,
Or do you feel like you ever really lost him?
No, I want to talk about that for a second, because it's, you know, at my age, there's a lot of people passing away, and people, you know, that I care about profoundly. But I want to talk about two things. Yeah. I had a friend who, when she got pregnant, had a miscarriage. And this was a woman who, being a mother was what it was all about. And I don't know, at any rate, it was a crushing experience for her. And I remember talking to her, it was over the phone, but I remember talking to her about sadness. And I realized something in that conversation with her, that we really have two kinds of sadness. There's something we really like about sadness. There's a certain kind of sadness we really love. We actually will pay for it when we go to the theater or to the movies. And the more sad it is, the better it is.
The more alive we feel.
That's very good. That's exactly
Sadness makes you feel alive.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It is a fundamental human expression. Yeah. And so it's an opportunity to express your humanity. It's also what heals loss. As she and I discussed, it's like you get a cut across the belly, and something reminds you of your loss. Yeah. And if you can experience the loss with that kind of authentic sadness, that poignant kind of sadness, some of that cut starts to be healed. Then something will remind you later, and the sadness will disappear, and you get busy with something, and then it'll come back. Yeah. Then there's the other kind of sadness, which is a kind of, well, as I would say it, it is unquestionably a reactivation of earlier losses. And that's the kind of sadness that doesn't heal anything, and it isn't a human expression. So I believe, and now to get back to John, I'm as happy about the things that John created in life, the kind of contribution he made to the quality of people's lives, the partner he was in the Hunger Project, and in a couple of other endeavors. is as real for me, and that's what I celebrate when I think about John.
Very good. I was thinking the two kinds of sadness. The first kind is the scar. The second kind is the open sore.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first kind reminds me of what Aristotle had to say about catharsis.
Yeah.
Right? This is one of the reasons we do like to experience sadness in the theater, because it is an association, but on the other hand, it is also an opportunity to do some healing. If it's a great work of art. If it's just, crapping on the floor, it's not so great.
Yes.
As Werner might say.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to read you the first
Great.
question, and I'm afraid I'm going to have some more in between. But Werner, what would you say to those that are now leading the programs from seminars, touched by you, that are still impacting people to this day? What would you say to the people who are now particularly
it's
active?
real simple for me. It's applause. And thank you for what you're doing. And I'm in touch with some of those people, a very small minority of the people who lead seminars for Landmark. But, I just have a real respect for people willing to take on what's required to get themselves trained to the point where they can lead seminars effectively and make a difference in the lives of people who participate in their seminars. And I can say all that in just one word, namely applause.
Hear, hear. It is hard, though, to accept being the person who's following one of the guys who started something.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my friends in graduate school, the frontispiece of his dissertation was, if I have failed in this dissertation, it is because giants are standing on my shoulders.
Well, here's the thing, Jonathan, you were a part of this, so you'll know. There's a woman who was considering doing some sort of a history with me, and she just couldn't believe that I was uninterested in who I was. I was interested in the nature of the ideas. And so, my relationship with the people who, in Landmark, for example, who offer the forum, and the seminar leaders who offer programs as volunteers for people who've been through the forum, I have no sense of their having a connection to me. I have a sense that they have a connection to the possibility that the ideas make available.
Good. So, thank you. So I'm going to say a couple of names.
Yes.
Buckminster Fuller.
Oh yeah, we know Bucky. I have to tell you about Bucky. So Bucky's grandson had participated in some of the programs, and he and I became acquaintances. And he said, "I'd like to introduce you to my grandfather, Buckminster Fuller." And I said, "Oh, great! I'd love to meet Bucky." I wasn't trying to be familiar. Everybody knew Bucky is Bucky. But at any rate, Bucky paid me one of the greatest compliments I've ever been paid. What he said was, "I had lunch with my grandson and Werner Erhard, and I decided he was all right because my toes didn't curl during lunch." Now, Bucky was really special. He really was quite an extraordinary guy. And I loved the thing he said when he had really crashed and burned, and the people who invested in this project that he was doing lost all of their money, and he was so broke that he had to send Anne, his wife, and his daughter to live with their parents, and he was standing by a reservoir thinking about throwing himself in. And he said, and I won't get this quite right. I'll get what he said right, but he said that he suddenly realized that what he could do was to devote the rest of his life to contributing to the average person's life. And that's the way he played it, and he was really good at it.
Yeah. Warren Bennis, the
Oh, yeah.
scholar we saw in the film,
Yes.
passed away last year.
Yeah, and Warren was always just really great with me. He and I met, he had had a heart attack, and he was living with another great name in London, outside of London, in one of the Queen's castles, and in an apartment in one of the Queen's castles. And somebody told him he needed to do the training. I don't remember who it was, but somebody told him. And he did do it. And then after that, he looked me up, and he and I became buddies. He moved to San Francisco for a while, and he and I spent a lot of time together, and he did a lot of consulting. But I want to tell you about my first encounter with him. My first encounter with him was in a setup very much like this. It was bleachers in the St. Francis Hotel, and it was the first talk I ever did about using the principles in business. And I can remember to the day, that right there is where Warren stood, and I'm going on and blah, 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 whatever I'm saying. And Warren stands up, this guy stands up and says, "Stop, stop, stop." So out loud, you know. And so I looked up, I said, "Yeah, what's the problem?" Assuming that, you know, he was going to argue with something. And he said, "Don't go so fast. I'm trying to assimilate the ideas." And afterwards he came down. That's where he and I met. And Warren was just really great with me. He was very, 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 very generous. He, he read some rather long, maybe not great papers that I had written. And, you know, he was just good about it. And I'm sure that, you know, hundreds of people, or maybe thousands of people sent him documents that he had to read. And he was just, he was just really great with me. And Hanukkah and I just had breakfast with his widow, Grace, who we got fond of over the time that we would go visit Warren and Grace in California.
A very popular professor at USC.
Oh, yes.
One of my good friends had lunch with him often.
He's probably the most noteworthy leadership guru. I don't remember how many enormous number of books that he wrote on leadership.
I'm going to ask you a self-indulgent question about one person, one name. Fritz Perls.
Oh, yes. Well,
for those of you who don't know, some of you do know, Fritz Perls was the, how should we say, hippie guru psychiatrist at Esalen in the 60s.
That's right. And that's where that's exactly right. That's where I met Fritz. I was in a couple of classes that he did. And, you know, he was, again, one of those guys who talks straight. And
I do my thing, you do your thing.
Yes.
And if we meet each other, it's beautiful. If not, it can't be helped.
Yes. And the thing with him was that when you interacted with him, he got you to the place where you were being straight about whatever it was that you were talking about. No,
Okay.
I liked Fritz. He was my kind of guy.
So, Werner, what are the questions you ask yourself to generate yourself and decide what to work on now?
Yeah, I kind of, that's easy for me because I've always looked at where things weren't going so well. So one of the places, one of the places where I've spent a lot of time looking in the last maybe 3, 4, 5 years is, well, what the hell are you doing? And the first thing I realized, because what I use my life for at the moment is completing the work that I am in the midst of so that I can leave it behind for somebody else to take apart and move or use or take to the next level. And one of the first things I realized was that I actually don't figure things out. I've trained myself over the years to put aside what I know or think or believe and just, and I'm going to use a couple different words, just look rather than figure out, rather than try to understand, rather than try to, I can't say that any better, rather than to try to figure it out, rather than try to know something, rather than figure out, think about. No, I don't want to do any of those things. I just want to look. And then what I mean by look is I want to be with something, with nothing between me and what I'm being with, so that I can get a sense of what's actually going on there. And so that's a part of what I've done to develop myself, is to look rather than figure out, or to be with something so that I can see into it and see what's available in there.
And what I know from talking with you and seeing what you're reading is a lot of it is about neuroscience.
Yeah.
Which is an interest we share.
Yes.
So
it was, let's see. Oh, yes. It was something called the Barbados Group. It wasn't the Barbados Group to start with. It didn't have a name, but it was about some ideas that I was developing, and I got together a bunch of thinkers and practitioners and asked them to be with me to discuss these ideas. And one of them, Bruce Gregory, he was actually on that film, which was great.
Yeah.
He's the guy from the astrophysicist at the Harvard,
one of the
blah,
Harvard,
blah, blah. Yeah,
labs.
I can't remember. Anyway, yes.
It's that other school up there in Boston.
That's right. Yes, exactly.
Cambridge, Boston.
At any rate, he was the guy who got me started on neuroscience, because here we are talking about the nature of human being. What is the nature and function of being for human beings, and what is the possibility of being for human beings? In other words, what is it that you wind up with, and what's possible beyond what you wound up with? And he is the guy who got me started on neuroscience. Not just me, but me and a lot of other people in that group.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So here's, I think in today's world, in today's world, if you're not informed by neuroscience, you're in trouble. You're likely to step in some landmines that neuroscience would help to keep you out of. Mm-hmm. So let me just give you a quick example. In the work that we have this thing called Creating Course Leaders, in which we train university professors to teach this leadership course that my colleagues and I developed. And one of the things I start with is everything going on in your chair is caused by your brain. And there isn't anybody probably no neuroscientist who wouldn't agree with that.
Yeah.
There's nothing going on in your chair that isn't caused by your brain. Yeah, but blah, 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 blah. So here's what happens for me. It washes away a lot of nonsense that I've heard about, that I was taught, that I've read about, and that others have told me about. Washes it away, because I'm clear that every word out of my mouth is not picked by me, it's picked by my brain. In fact, this thing I refer to when I say I or me is also generated by my brain. Yeah. Now, I don't think that's the whole story, but I think that until you can get yourself comfortable about that, there's a lot of blind alleys down which you are likely to go. So yeah, I think you need, I think that to have access to the nature and function of what it is to be human, both the way I wound up being and the possibilities beyond the way I wound up being, that there's a lot more to it than the materialist, as it would be called, view. But I think that without that, you want, I know, because I went down some blind alleys that I had to come back out of, and it's helped to keep me out of certain blind alleys. So that's the neuroscience story in a nutshell.
So a big turn now. Somebody asked about the Moscow Project.
Oh, yeah.
Did you talk about the Moscow Project? And
well, you know
what was going on there?
Yeah, I can't. Oh, I do remember. Isn't that amazing? Anything I remember is amazing, trust me. It was an Episcopalian priest who did a lot of work. Boy, I'm sorry, I don't remember the man's name, and I should. Really great guy, who got me interested in, at that time, what was going on in the Soviet Union and what could be done to maybe make some kind of a difference in the Soviet Union. So the first time I went, the first number of times that I went, it was the Soviet Union. And one of the colleagues that I went with was an economist. He had been the chief economist for some big firm, I can't remember. At any rate, we didn't make much headway. We really did not make much headway. David, I won't get the last name, David would argue with the party's view. And I would see if there was a way to create some opening. Now, we did get a chance to do work in what was called the Znanya Society. And the Znanya Society was the Soviet, everything in the Soviet Union was enormous. It was called, that Znanya, it translates to the all Union Knowledge Society. And it was where all the adult education went on. So I did get a chance to deliver some programs there, and through that I got an opportunity. I became friends, that's too strong a word, I became associates with with professors from the, and I can't remember the name of the university, but it was, at least they thought it was the Harvard Business School of the Soviet Union. But then, I started to hear about the transition with Gorbachev.
Yeah.
And I would do a program at that university, and they would say, well, we heard all that from Gorbachev, which was interesting, yeah. And
Maybe
then,
he had the training.
Excuse me?
Maybe had he done the training?
No.
He'd done some training.
Yes, he'd done. Yeah, it's pretty interesting whatever he did. But
well, the Esalen group, as you know, Mike Murphy.
Yep.
Had a big program in the 60s and 70s.
Yep.
Also with the Soviet Union.
Yep. Yes.
And I don't know what today Mike thinks about that, but it was a frustration, I think. He wanted Esalen to be better known for that effort.
Yeah.
Than they were.
Boy, bringing up Mike Murphy, it just reminds me, I haven't been, is Mike still alive,
Still alive,
do you know?
yes.
Yeah. I will have to get in touch. I remember times after dinner at the Franklin House when I would sit on Mike's chest because I pushed him down on the floor trying to explain something to him.
As only a real friend would do.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. Oh, my God, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, he likewise...
He explains a bit to you, too.
Yeah, that's right. He had things to explain to me, exactly. And George Leonard was, of course, part of that whole contingent.
Originally Time Life, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
no. Post.
The New York Newsweek? Was it
No,
Newsweek?
it was
He was a
big
journalist.
deal magazine
Yeah.
at the time. Was one of the best magazines at the time, almost an equal with Life.
Yeah. Was it Look? Was it Look?
I think it was Look. I think
It was
that's
Look.
right.
Sorry for
Sorry
the
for the
reminiscing.
old men's
Yeah.
reminiscences.
Speak for yourself. Okay.
That's right. I would, all my life I was the kid. Now I am the older one, and I demand a certain respect for
Yeah.
my age.
Well, you're not going to get it here. Another name, and then a couple of questions we're going to
Yeah, please.
Alan Watts.
Oh yeah. Whew. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very moved, obviously touched and moved by what I learned from Alan. He really opened up he opened a door. My work with Alan opened a door to something that I didn't have access to without the work that I did with Alan. And the work Alan did on me is the way I should say that, and that would be the right way. Yeah, extraordinary guy, really, really remarkable guy. I think if somebody sat down and read one of his books, maybe the one called The Book.
The Book.
Yeah, it would still be as relevant
Even
today.
more. I mean, we're in that kind of world now.
Yep.
So speaking of the world we're in, interesting question here. We're in a world, I'll say this and then I'll ask the question, in which there's more, people seem to be in a way closing in on themselves or their group or their nationality. People are feeling very much under threat. There's the other and so forth.
Yes.
Is it possible to be, and this is roughly the question, is it possible to engage in a transformation in a world in which there are nations and ethnicities and races, socially constructed if they are, political parties, ideologies? Is it possible to have a real transformation in such a world?
Yeah, I say yes, and I'd like to share a little bit about why I say yes, because I don't believe so. I have some pretty good evidence that it's possible. And I learned this from a group of paramilitaries in Northern Ireland. The people you saw in the film were not the paramilitaries. These were community leaders and people who were making a difference in their communities. The paramilitaries, half of them were just pure gangsters, and a Catholic nun in Northern Ireland, see, I try not to use names here, Catholic nun in Northern Ireland who was respected by both sides of the conflict, asked me to come work with the Protestant school. Some of you may remember, I mean, so long ago you probably don't, but some of you may remember that Catholic kids had to walk up this long street to get to their grade school, and it was a Protestant street, and they were being harassed and abused, and somebody threw a bomb, and so on and so forth. And the school was just traumatized the teachers, so I agreed.
Was this the Bloody Sunday episode? It was another
No,
one.
no,
Another one.
another one. At any rate, I'm trying to see how to shorten this. At any rate, the teachers at the Catholic school, I only tell stories about what turns out well, right? So I'll just tell you how it turned out. Within 6 months, the children from the Catholic school were going over to the Protestant school across the street, and they were going back and forth, and everything worked out. That wasn't what I wanted to tell you. What I wanted to tell you was that the nun who had gotten me to do that kind of work asked me if I would meet with the last paramilitary group that had not given up their guns. There was a program in Northern Ireland where the paramilitaries gave up their guns. The guns were not able to be used to incriminate them in anything.
It was an amnesty kind of.
Yes, and the general, I've forgotten his last name, was a Canadian that they turned over their guns to. At any rate, so I met with them, and the first time I met with them, they called us on the phone and told us where to come to meet, because you couldn't set up anything in advance with these people. And I was there, and I'm the outsider, of course. And I said, okay, look, I don't know, what's the story here? What is going on here with all this conflict? What is going on? So the first guy said blah, 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 blah for, 15 minutes, maybe it was 20 or 30 minutes, but it was quite a long time. And I said, okay, I got that, and I asked questions, and I said, did you mean, and blah, blah. And then the next guy did the same thing. Exactly the same words. And each person said the same thing over and over and over and over. And I told Breach, I said, look, I don't see any way to make a difference. I'm going to go home and I'll look at it. And I went home, and what I realized, Jonathan, was they kept saying the same thing over and over because they never had the experience that somebody got it. Yeah. And I said, Breach, I'm coming back. Yeah. We're going to meet with them one more time. And now,
they wanted to be heard.
They wanted to be gotten,
even
more than heard. But if you think about it, if you've got something to say and somebody actually leaves you with the experience that what was going on where you are is now also going on where the other is. And not that you agree or disagree, just you recreated the other person. But that's not good enough. You've got to leave them with the experience that you've recreated them. In an hour, nobody had anything to say in the second go-around. And then I could, first off, ask them, what was the almost certain future, the predictable future? And nobody liked it. And I said, how would you like to create a new future? Yeah. And I guess 3 trips. After the 3rd trip, I almost got the chatelaine, something, I can't remember his name. At any rate, again, I don't tell stories that didn't turn out well, so this one's going to turn out well too. They gave up their guns.
They did, yeah.
And they got an award from the government to do community work, and ever since then, that's what they've done, is community work, and gotten, paid for it. And that was an enormous learning experience for me. Yeah. Great.
An NBC newscaster in the early 70s was a panel at a college where Leslie and I went, and they were all asked, what is the most miserable place in the world? And this was during the Vietnam War, and they agreed that it was Northern Ireland.
Yeah, really tragic for the people. At any rate, before I don't get a chance, because Jonathan's going to close things up, one of the reasons that I hang around Jonathan is because he's an extraordinarily interesting guy. So if you get a chance to participate in something or sit in on something that Jonathan does, like either the program tonight or the program tomorrow, I recommend it. And
well, that's a good segue for me to mention that although we do need to clear out in a few minutes, at 5:30 there will be a reception upstairs with some very nice food, preparing for the next event in the film festival. If you want to approach one of my colleagues to see if there are still tickets, you want to hang around, would love to see you. It's going to be another amazing conversation with Tim Leary's son Zach, who is here, and Rick Doblin, the pioneer of psychedelic therapy. After you will see Dying to Know, which is a fascinating documentary about the relationship between Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, now known as Baba Ram Dass. And tomorrow night also, I think there are some tickets available, Experimenter, about the obedience to authority experiment by Stanley Milgram. A narrative film, Peter Sarsgaard plays Milgram, does a beautiful performance. So last question, speaking of movies, mm-hmm. I'm learning some things from these people here. Yeah. George Clooney movie?
Yeah.
Is there a rumor about that?
Oh, I doubt it.
Oh, we gotta. Well, let's start the rumor. It's an open future, you know.
Yes.
Maybe it'll happen. Okay, so several people ask, and we're going to stop. What's next?
Oh, what's next is, as I said, for me to complete writing up the work that I've developed, and with my colleagues, one of whom was a gentleman you saw up here, Michael Jensen. Mike is an extraordinary guy and extraordinary intellect, and he's also a very famous economist. And so I've learned a little bit about economics, and Mike and I work on developing the work that we've invented for an academic environment. So, for example, in a couple of months, we'll go, Mike and another colleague, Jerry Echevarria, who was the chief academic officer for the University of the State University of California State University
Cal State.
program,
Yeah.
Yes, and I. They have big, long stuff after their name.
That's what we get paid for.
Yes, and they're really powerful people. At any rate, we'll be going to Clemson University to do this, conduct this leadership course over a period of 6, 7, whatever it is, days, and we'll spend a week before further refining the program, and a couple days afterwards refining the program. Let's see, the other one that I know about is in Abu Dhabi. We did the program in Dubai with one sheikh, and that sheikh said, if you come back, I'll fill the place. So we'll go, but we won't go to Dubai, we'll go to Abu Dhabi. And Mike and Jerry and I Jerry just came back from Kenya, where she taught the course with two other academics from, I've forgotten the two universities, and Mike and I spent hours and hours and hours on the phone together writing. Let's see, we finished a paper called Putting Integrity into Finance that was accepted by the National Bureau of Economic Research and has now been accepted by some journal about something in capitalism. And Mike and I are now writing the book, which will be the end of what we do with integrity for the Oxford University Press. And then we've got 2 or 3 other books that need to get finished writing. So that's what I'm doing. One last thing, in addition to thanking Jonathan for the opportunity to be here today, I just think you're great. I mean, I just really think you're great. I'd so love meeting the couple of people I met when we came into the place, and it's just great how great you look, first off, but also, and I mean that, you know, it's really, there's kind of life happening where you are, and that's very moving for me. And your generosity with me is extraordinary, and I'm deeply appreciative of your generosity. So thank you very much for sitting here and watching and listening. It's really great of you to take the time out during the day to have gotten, I'm going to say it from my view, for an opportunity for me to be with you today. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Werner. That's great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.